the devolution of the Zelda formula. In this video essay, we'll be exploring the Zelda franchise and its formula from the beginnings all the way to the latest entry as today, which is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. The objective is to prove that the creators did not break the Zelda formula, as has been said countless times. It is also worth mentioning that few key Zelda titles will be used for this essay. When talking about games, people can't talk about iconic titles without going through most of the Nintendo titles. According to Maxim magazine, the gaming titan holds 8 of the 30 best video game franchises of all time. And according to Time magazine, Nintendo owns 3 of the 15 most influential characters of all time. Without a doubt, they know how to create stories and characters that go way beyond the pass of time. One of those franchises is The Legend of Zelda. Originally released on 1986 for the Famicom and 1987 for the NES, The Legend of Zelda tells the tale of Link on his quest to save Princess Zelda and Hyrule from the Demon King Ganon. Back in the day, the game was impressive. Huge in scale, this big map was filled with different dungeons that you could explore, items to collect and enemies to kill. All this with next to no explanation on how to do anything, besides what was written on the booklet that came with the game. The game actually fed our imaginations by its unique way of telling the story. And you see, back then, the concept of video game sequels was something new. So when Zelda 2 Link's Adventure came out the next year on the same console, they tried something drastically different that didn't quite work out. It was still a big open world, but the game divided in 2 modes. Exploration mode, where you walk through the overmap, and battle mode, when you went from side-scrolling perspective to fight enemies or go through towns and dungeons. Nintendo took note of the feedback. With that characteristic sense of scale and freedom, the franchise entered the 16-bit era with yet another huge open-world game, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. It had everything that the first Zelda had and expanded on it. A more fleshed out story, with a bigger map and twice the dungeons, although it lacked some of the freedom that the player had in the first entry. In The Legend of Zelda, the player was literally just thrown in the world without any explanation, only to discover it by him or herself. Dungeons could be tackled in any order whatsoever. In A Link to the Past, objectives were introduced. There was a big world to explore, and yet, the game was telling the player where to go next. This feature would impact deeply the storytelling of future entries. Then came the 64-bit era. Nintendo made the transition from sprite-based 2D games to polygon-based 3D games, and so did Zelda. The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time was the first entry of the franchise to be 3D. The world was so big for the N64, it pushed the limits of the console. There were new dungeons, time travel, a rich story, new enemies, new ways of interacting with the world. But due to console limitations, the game was linear, as a sandbox Hyrule would have been impossible in the N64. Thus, the world had to be explored in a certain way for it to reveal itself. This is where the formula settled down, making the first dungeon to be in the forest, to get the item in a dungeon that was designed to kill the boss, and kill Ganondorf. The next generation of Nintendo consoles still used this formula. The GameCube, even though capable of doing a lot more than the N64, still had a linear Zelda. The Zelda Twilight Princess. The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess had a big Hyrule map for its time. With a dark, grim, and more mature story, it took a page from A Link to the Past book and introduced the Twilight World, a dark dimension parallel to Hyrule. Nevertheless, this title was considered one of the most, if not the most, linear Zelda at the time. To explore the map, you needed to get rid of the Twilight magic covering the area. You transform into a wolf, kill a bunch of baddies, collect some spirit tears, then turn back to a human, rinsed and repeats. I may sound as if I'm saying it was a bad game, But actually, in my opinion, it was not. It might even be one of my favorite Zelda titles. And yes, I do acknowledge the open world nature of The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. But the story still was kind of linear, and the way that the world revealed itself was still linear too, following objectives in order to discover new islands. Also, it was not true open world, as the map was divided in sectors that limited the way to explore it. See the pattern yet? The formula went so far from do whatever you want however you want it, open world narrative, to you must do this first, then you can advance linear progression narrative. Don't get me wrong, whenever you discover a part of the map, it unlocked for exploration. But it was not as in the first entry of the series that the map was already there for exploration's sake. The next major entry was the controversial and divisive Skyward Sword. This title left basically no room for exploration. It took the bad parts of the Zelda formula and gave them some steroids. Overly informative and protective companion, non-cryptic exploring, clear remarks on what to do. The game basically holds your hand throughout all the experience. This game, while aesthetically and musically beautiful, was the peak of all the things wrong with the Zelda formula, but it was basically all we knew. Even handheld Zelda titles followed this formula with a 2D perspective. We just accepted it as it is. Then came Breath of the Wild. For most people, this game was mind-blowing. A true open-world Zelda title, with no restrictions on what to do or how to do it. Different approaches to the same problem. More than 100 mini-dungeons and 5 major dungeons, including the castle. Yet, your only true objective is destroy Ganon. People started to say how this game completely broke the Zelda formula, that this was a completely new franchise. When the truth was, we all sort of forgot how Zelda was at the beginning, and new generations only knew the linear kind of gameplay. The new entry added physics, cooking, armor sets, weapons, and more. Yes, but it is how it is at its core that matters. While it does have objectives, a tutorial area and suggestions on how to proceed, out of the tutorial level, nothing forces you to follow suit of what is told to you. As a player, you can go out of the tutorial area straight to the end boss. One of the most common critics of this game is the lack of story and how it's too bare bones. Well, the story is there, but like the first Zelda game, it revolves around exploration. The map feels alive, it invites you to explore it. Making an objective comparison, Breath of the Wild did not break any formula mold. It simply ditched the modern mold for the original one, all while adapting it for the modern era. You can see this entry is a transition, an experiment if you may. One that proved that this is the formula needed for the future entries. With over 9.32 million copies sold so far, you can bet that the next entries for the franchise will look back at its roots to replicate this success. Thank you very much.